Board of Oil, Gas, and Mining for the briefing session. Mr. Director.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and welcome members of the board to your monthly meeting in Salt Lake City. My name is John Baza. I'm the Director for the Division of Oil, Gas, and Mining, and we've got a couple of items we're going to brief you on this morning related to division business. The first item up is a legislative update by James Owen, who has been working as our legislative policy manager for the last few months. And James is going to provide you some information. Go ahead, James.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and members of the board. I'm James Owen, the division's legislative policy manager. The first update I'd like to give is that today will be my last day at the division. I have a new opportunity that I'll be moving on to. It's been my pleasure to be a division employee and to be interacting with you all and providing you updates on a regular basis, but someone else will be carrying the torch from here on, so it's been my pleasure. The first item in terms of legislative updates, we have 3 bills. We've been tracking a number of bills, but there are 3 bills that I would like to highlight for you this morning that we'll be keeping a close eye on as the session progresses. The first one is House Bill 267, titled Oil, Gas, and Mining Amendments. And this is a bill that's being run by Representative Chu. This bill modifies provisions of the code relating to surface use interactions between mineral estate holders and surface land owners. The bill essentially requires that operators and landowners work more closely together to create more mutually acceptable surface use agreements. Specifically, some of the provisions focus on making sure that the surface use is the greatest use possible, and that there's also some emphasis on compensation to surface landowners for things like loss of surface crops, loss of value, or permanent damage. I expect that this bill will probably have some reaction from the oil and gas industry. If not some pushback, then for sure there will probably be some dialogue about this bill. I wanted to highlight it because if this bill were to pass, it would likely require some rulemaking on the board and the division's part. So that's probably the bill that, of the 3 bills that I'm going to talk about, it's the only one that we've got language for so far. The next one is a Senate bill being run by Senator Van Tassel. It's titled State Regulation of Oil and Gas. And I'm sure some of you are aware of this bill, and it is kind of a reincarnation or resurrection of Senate Bill 189 from the 2017 session. This bill is expected to focus on some issues of what we call preemption, or the line between regulation of local municipalities or counties and cities, and then state regulation of oil and gas. Again, we don't have specific language, but once we do, we'll add that to our legislative update. And then the last one I wanted to highlight for you this morning is another House bill that is being run by Representative Handy, titled Oil and Gas Amendments. And I'm sure many of you are, or some of you are familiar with this bill. I believe that this will be a few new modifications to some of the compulsory pooling provisions. But again, we don't have the language yet, so we'll give you more updates as that progresses. I have a few rulemaking updates that I would like to give you this morning as well. The first one relates to the compulsory pooling rulemaking that was initiated based off the passage of Senate Bill 191 from the 2017 session. We opened up a comment period we solicited comments on the 9th of November, and we opened up a 60-day comment period. We have received comments, including some draft language, and moving forward, the process will be to review those comments and to review those drafts and determine whether or not we want to move forward into the formal rulemaking phase. The next rulemaking update relates to a 5-year renewal. Each year we have some of our rules that will lapse if they are not renewed. I've provided for all of you a copy of the letter that was sent out to our informal rules review group that solicits comments on those rules that are up for renewal. On the reverse side is a list of all the rules that will be renewed in April of 2018. The renewal will be published in the February 15th bulletin, and I've opened the comment period for the informal rules review group through the 2nd of March. We have already gotten some comments back, but I anticipate that we will be able to move forward with those renewals without any issue. That completes my formal updates. I did, while I'm up here, want to give one quick shout out to to Paul Gedge and his team that does such a good job of streaming and doing online streaming of these proceedings. I know that there's a lot of value that's provided to parties that are a part of the formal procedures, but I also wanted to make this board aware that I have had a number of stakeholders reach out to me and express their appreciation for being able to view online streaming of these briefing sessions, and it saves them costs and travel, and it saves them some informational heartache. It also allows them to put a face, with a voice and with a name that they hear. And one stakeholder in particular said that being able to listen to these sessions and watch helps a lot with their relationship with the division. So I wanted to give Paul and his team, Paul and Tommy, a shout out. That's it for me and my updates. If any of you have any questions as it relates to the legislature or rulemaking or anything else, I'm happy to answer.
Board members, any questions? I think on behalf, just speaking, I think I'm speaking on behalf of all the board. We sure appreciate your work and wish you the very, very best in your future endeavors. If you ever need anything, let us know.
Absolutely. Thank you very much.
You bet. Mr. Bosler.
I want to add my appreciation for James and the work that he's done for us. Many of you remember that he started with the division as a mining engineer in our coal program, and this is something like 8 or 10 years ago, wasn't it? And he's worked for the division quite a bit of those last few years, and it's kind of sad to see him go, but I'm excited for the opportunity that he's getting involved in. I can see some great value to him, but also a great value to some of the things that we're involved in. Do you want to explain what your new position is going to be, James?
Yeah, just briefly, I'll be working with Pacific Corp and Rocky Mountain Power in their policy and compliance division.
So with James leaving, it does leave a bit of a hole for us. I wanted you to know that my administrative assistant, Natasha, will be maintaining the legislative list, and we'll make arrangements to email that to you, just as James has been doing on a regular basis. But next month, you'll probably have to just deal with me giving the legislative update. So hopefully I can fill those shoes. The agenda today was rather short, but one other item has come up somewhat spontaneously, and we had our January oil and gas collaborative meeting out in Duchesne on the 11th of January. The theme of the meeting was produced water and its management. We had some speakers to address that. There was some great information presented, and I appreciate Chairman Gill and Mr. Moon for attending that meeting. But one of the things at the end of that, Mr. Gill asked that we provide the same presentation that I did at that meeting to this board. So that's what I'm going to attempt to do right now. And this is where we can stream this out. But I'm going to talk a bit about a national produced water work group that's been established that takes the concept of managing produced water beyond our borders and looks at all parts of the U.S. and kind of trying to establish the landscape or the state of knowledge related to how produced water can be managed, how it can be reused, perhaps how it can be beneficially used. So these are things that this study is going to conduct. I'm going to talk a minute, but I'm wondering if Mr. Mike Pake would come up and sit next to me while we're doing this. You might have some comments to make while I'm speaking. Mr. Pake is the executive director of the Groundwater Protection Council, who I'm going to reference as part of this slideshow. Mike is here for another set of meetings that will take place today and tomorrow, but I invited him to come just to participate in the briefing this morning. And as I go through the slideshow, Mike, feel free to make comment, but I'll sure give you time at the end to say a few words on your own.
Mike, welcome.
Thank you.
And then the other thing is we advise you to, all of our hearings are recorded, so you need to speak close to the mic.
Okay, I will do. Thank you, Commissioner.
So first of all, to begin, the division is a member of several national organizations which we've talked about in the past. IOGCC, IMCC, and the Groundwater Protection Council. We participate in these organizations through their annual and semi-annual meetings. We interact regularly, correspond with them. It's a network of people and state officials all across the country who we can turn to for advice and counsel when we have issues that come up in the state. About the Groundwater Protection Council, and this is hard to read, so I'm going to read some of the language from it. The Groundwater Protection Council is a nonprofit organization whose members consist of state groundwater regulatory agencies which come together within the GWPC organization to mutually work towards the protection of the nation's groundwater supplies. The purpose of the GWPC is to promote and ensure the use of best management practices and fair but effective laws requiring comprehensive groundwater protection. So the board members of GWPC consist of 2 representatives nationwide from each EPA region in the U.S. I am the oil and gas representative for the Region 8 states. We also have Kevin Frederick from Wyoming, who is the DEQ representative for Region 8 states. And similarly, there are board members who represent other regions of the country. Let me say a quote from, again, this is off the GWPC webpage. The board of directors includes representatives of state regulatory agencies responsible for groundwater protection and underground injection activity. Board members serve a 2-year term and may be re-elected. So I think I'm in my second 2-year term now. We'll see how long I last on this board. Depends on what kind of job I do.
I did notice that, shame on us, we don't have a star in the state of Utah there, even though you have a star here, so we'll have to fix that.
Okay. Well, our meeting in April of 2017, we discussed the concept of trying to study produced water on a national basis. Groundwater Protection Council has often been looked to as a reference source, as a credible source of information related to a number of issues across the country. But obviously the management of produced water from the oil field has become a tremendous item of interest. And Groundwater Protection Council, through its board, passed a resolution. And the resolution was to create a national study group to focus on regulatory, scientific, and technological challenges concerning the beneficial use of produced water from oil and gas production. And I can certainly provide you with a copy of that resolution if you wanted it, but it's also available on the GWPC website. So to give you a chronology of how this produced water work group came to be and is now functioning, in April of 2017, as I mentioned, the board passed a resolution. In May, only a month later, we identified co-chairs of that work group. One is Shelley Chard, who is the head of the Oklahoma Water Quality Division, and then myself, an oil and gas knowledgeable representative. So once we did that designation of the leadership, then in June, we identified who was going to be on the work group. This included multiple state government representatives, scientific and academic representatives, and petroleum industry representatives. In July, we held our first meeting here in Salt Lake in this very room. And at that, we brought a team of people together. There's probably about 30 of them. We identified initial research modules that we ought to be covering. And we talked about a potential time frame. We felt that if this was a study that was going to take 3 or 4 years, that was too long. But we needed to have enough time to do a credible job of gathering information together and identifying where produced water could be effectively used. In August, we had a second meeting in Oklahoma City. We established module leaders for the 3 modules we identified. And the module outlines were developed and refined. We identified some additional ground rules for writing styles and glossary of terms. The module leaders were given instructions to enlist subject matter experts as needed to address their respective topics. And we had breakouts into the individual modules to organize ourselves even more as to how we were going to prepare and present this report. One of the key items we talked about in July was presented by Mr. John Vail. He's a consultant. He's worked for Argonne National Laboratories. He's well known around both the petroleum industry and groundwater circles, but he gave us kind of a orientation to what the big issues were. This is also a fairly long report and set of slides. I can provide you copies of that as you want them. But I'm also going to talk about what were some of the significant takeaways we all got from John's report to us. Continuing with the chronology of the group, after August in Oklahoma City, in September, we had a meeting of the module leaders and subgroups as part of the Groundwater Protection Council annual forum in Boston. We did an initial progress report to the GWPC board, who were also there. We continued to identify and recruit subject matter experts to address the topics as needed, and we commenced a limited writing of the module sections. In recent months, I know I've participated in some conference calls on a regular basis. The module leaders began holding regular conference calls. The module 1 to 3 drafts have started and are slowly coming to fruition. And one of the reasons Mr. Paik is here in Salt Lake City today is we're bringing the module chairmen together to talk about where we're at, where we need to go. The next meeting of all of the participants in this work group is going to be in Tulsa, Oklahoma, as part of GWPC's Underground Injection Control Conference coming up in mid-February. So let me talk about the key takeaways from John Vail's report that we heard in July. Utah's produced water volumes aren't even in the top 10 of producing states in the U.S. However, in 2013, which was the information that John had compiled, Utah ranked 11th in oil production and 10th in natural gas production. We are definitely in the mix as an oil and gas producer. We may not be in the top 10, but we're also not dragging at the hind end either. We're very much involved in oil and gas issues throughout the nation. Just as a side note, the Utah petroleum industry produces about 6 barrels of water for every barrel of oil. Our numbers are showing that in 2016, this amounted to over 159 million barrels, or over 20,000 acre-feet of produced brackish water. Nationally, 84% of this produced water is re-injected for enhanced recovery or deep well injection for disposal. Reuse of produced water in the oil field has been the most prevalent means of managing these tremendous volumes. There's no argument with that. And frankly, because the business of oil and gas industry is to produce oil and gas, produced water has always been kind of looked at as a byproduct, something that would need to be moved out of the way and managed through disposal processes. The opportunities for other methods of reuse focus on current consumptive uses of fresh water. For example, if fresh water is being used to wash cars, maybe some of this produced water could be cleaned up just enough so they could use it to wash cars and not necessarily as consumptive purposes. Some of the barriers that John mentioned for more reuse of produced water than what is happening now, economics are one. You've got to move the produced water and handle it and perhaps even clean it up to a certain amount. Data management. Utah is a bit different. I think we do a better job than most states in tracking produced water volumes. But there's a lot of states out there who don't even pay attention to how much produced water is coming out of the oil field. Social acceptance is a big one. And I've got a slide here that's kind of a remark on social acceptance. Volume and timing of demand for the end use. Sometimes, if produced water is needed to be used in one area at a certain time of the year, it's not the same ability to transport it there from the oil field at other times of the year. And then there's an uncertain policy nationwide relative to the ownership, the rights of use, and the liabilities for produced water. I don't think the producing oil companies want to be a water source necessarily for people who want to consume or use produced water in other sources. But if the transfer of liability can occur effectively through state statute, it could represent an opportunity. On social acceptance, Mike and I were both in a meeting in the Aspen Institute in September. And of course, this is a topic that came up. But this is a sign in one of the bathrooms, of all places. It says, clean, safe drinking water is the foundation of life and is extremely scarce. Over 1 billion people in the developing world do not have access to this basic need. Therefore, the Aspen Institute is committed to technologies that promote fresh water conservation. Each Falcon water-free urinal saves up to an average of 40,000 gallons of fresh water a year. Well, I think social acceptance is going to evolve. I think we're going to find as a society that water is one of the most precious commodities we can have. If, in my mind, if over 20,000 acre-feet of produced water can be used elsewhere to displace fresh water uses in Utah, that's a net benefit to the public. And I think it's a valuable thing to be looking at. So some of our next steps. I mentioned that in February we're going to be meeting in Tulsa and some things that we want to do while we're in Tulsa. In April, there's going to be a second progress report to the GWPC board. They passed this resolution last April. We owe it to them to go back and explain what we're doing next April. The next two items are just kind of my hopes for the study. September in 2018, later this year, we'll do a third progress report to the board. Hopefully we'll have some initial drafts that will go through some editing on the report. We'll address any further report gaps that need to be identified. And I'm really, really hoping that by February of next year, we can get a final draft produced for publication. That may be optimistic as these things go. I know that some people in the academic community would say that's too fast. But I think that it's a good time frame if we can produce something useful in that time. So I'm happy to answer any questions, but I'd like to turn some time to Mr. Pate for any comments that you have about this process.
Thanks, John. Thank you all for letting me sit here with you today. It's a little impromptu. I appreciate the opportunity. I've known John for a long time, and the Groundwater Protection Council has been affiliated with the Oil and Gas Commission here for 30 years through previous directors, and John has perhaps been the most active of any director in the division on our board of directors, and I hope he sticks around a long time. The GWPC is also, and this is kind of a thank you, is what it really amounts to, is also inextricably linked to the division through something that we built and we showcase in Utah, and that's called risk-based data management. And it's the system that John uses to run his division, anything from operator field inspections or operator entry for permitting and the administrative things he has to do. And when we have to demonstrate that in another state, and as I'm going to do in Mexico next week, we use Utah. We use Utah's system as the example of how the system can run. And then on Frac Focus, something that GWPC maintains and runs, Utah was one of the first states in the country to adopt chemical disclosure and reporting through Frac Focus. So kudos to you all and to John, and we appreciate our relationship with the division and the commission. So John hit most of the points. I would add that this really is going to be a groundbreaking report. There are no other reports in water reuse and recycling that deal with oil and gas, and it's kind of an untouched area. Nobody wants to kind of get into it, and we decided to take it on. And there's significant interest. I get emails and inquiries from universities, from labs, different associations, some utilities, all wanting to know what we're doing and can they be a part of it and that sort of thing. One of the things that I like to use to describe the significance of this report is in that John Vail study. He found that in 2013 there were about 23 billion barrels of water brought to the surface. And John gave you the numbers for Utah. If you take that number and multiply it times 42 gallons per barrel, you get something close to 1 trillion gallons of water are produced by the oil and gas industry every year. I've had a couple of operators tell me over the years that they feel like they're in the water business, not the oil business, because they have to deal with all that water. So if we just stop and say, just for today's purpose, 1 trillion gallons, holy cow. I mean, shouldn't we be looking at that? Is there not some potential? And of course the answer is we should be looking at it. And if even 10% of that water could be treated and used to supplement fresh water, agriculture, industry, aquifer storage is something we're looking at, controlling subsidence in some states from production. And if that water can supplement treated fresh water, the public saves money instantly. So it's a worthy study, and we're looking forward to the end of it. I might just add there are 3 pieces to it. We call them modules, and I'm here today and tomorrow to work with John's team on producing these modules. One is kind of an administrative module that John and his co-chair will be, they're overseeing the entire study, but it'll be a presentation of why this organization, our organization, has this interest in teeing up the challenges of the study, some of the kind of figures I just mentioned. And the second module is going to focus on the oil and gas industry itself. And we believe that the oil and gas industry is the leader in oil, in field, as we like to call it, recycling and reuse. Of course they are. And so we want to recognize the fact that the industry has taken a significant lead in all states as they work to recycle and reuse produced water. And different treatment technologies are being developed for frac fluids and that sort of thing. So that's module 2 to talk about the significant strides that are being made in the industry. And then module 3 takes a look outside the oil field per se, using that same water. And we've got examples around the country of where things are being done for agriculture, industrial cooling and that sort of thing. And we'll highlight some of those, but as we take a look at agricultural industry, perhaps aquifer storage and recovery for later withdrawal and treatment, we are going to point out research needs. We're not naive in thinking that the economics are all here right now or that the treatment technologies are perfect. We do understand there's a ways to go, but what changes faster than technology? And the economics, as you get higher demand and more population, the economics come down. So we'll be taking a look at all that, suggesting research areas that need to be pursued in the coming years, and appreciate John's efforts and your willingness to be engaged in this study. So thank you all.
Thank you very much. Board members, any questions? Comments? I've got a couple. One on water and then the second one on John himself. On water, it would be really helpful to know what the point of where the water needs to be cleaned up for agriculture, particularly farming. And my understanding it's about 17 parts per million or something like that. Or in Delta, Utah, that's the natural water anyway. So, you know, what is the point where water can be used for agriculture? And then anything that you can do on that, I just can't tell you how excited I am about the prospect of taking some of this water and putting it into wildlife and agriculture. That just seems like it's a huge challenge, but it's doable. And one of the things that, you know, I actually tried to get involved in this. The company I work for tried to fund some new technologies. We finally got down to the point where, you know, apart from the cost of it, you still had that little sheen on the top. That was the one difficult final step to make it worthwhile. So, yes, encourage you to do that. It's a wonderful initiative. John, thank you for being involved in it. And then now to my second point, John, I don't know if we as a board often enough say thank you to your long-term perspective of optimizing where we're headed. You know, certainly your national awards, your chairmanship or co-chairs of national groups speaks volumes about the good job you're doing. And then we as a board see your steady hand in the agency. We're seeing progress with companies. I think the message that we're open for business is being accepted by industry as long as it's done responsibly with environmental protections in place. We're on our way, and so I hope I'm speaking on behalf of the board, but on behalf of the board, we want to thank you for what you're doing and stellar performance. The idea of having a state agency that gets to have the public tell it how it's doing. It takes a survey every year of how you performed is, I think, also remarkable. And the fact that you get such high marks is certainly a compliment to you and your staff. So on behalf of the board, I just wanted to make sure that was put on the record, sent out, streaming to the rest of the world.
Well, I thank you, Mr. Chairman, and members of the board. I don't think the division could do the things it does without your support and your policy and administrative guidance. So thanks back to all of you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. I'll finish out the agenda fairly quickly here so that you'll have time before your formal matters start. I did want to say that our next board meeting will be again here in Salt Lake City in February. To give you a preview of what's coming down the road, we are working on some out-of-town board meetings that we may wish to conduct later in the year. We'll identify those as quickly as possible and try to get information out to you. Perhaps at the next board meeting we can discuss what kinds of opportunities are there for doing those out-of-town board meetings and field trips associated with them. On the calendar, I think the only thing I would highlight besides your regular board meetings in February and March, in April 12th to be specific, we have our next quarterly oil and gas meeting in the Uintah Basin. We're going to try to expand that a little bit. In the past, it's been referred to as the Waxy Crude Conference, and we don't want to limit ourselves to just crude oil production out of the Uintah Basin. So we're going to try to retitle it. It may be something like the Uintah Basin Hydrocarbon Conference or something like that. But we're already designing a group of speakers, some panels, maybe some highlighted topics that we'd like to address. We'd sure encourage you to be there. We've been working to put it again back at the same event center in Duchesne. So we'll be giving you more information as that develops. But you may want to mark your calendars now for Thursday, April 12th, out in the Uintah Basin. With that, Mr. Chairman, I did want to mention that the department has put out an annual report. I don't know if that's been distributed to you yet, but there's a compendium of all DNR divisions that's in a nice little pamphlet, brochure, there you go, Gordon's showing it to us. And I would encourage you to look at that and get an idea of how the division fits in with the entire family of DNR agencies, and that's for your information. I also wanted to mention that you probably realize we've kicked off the nomination process for our Environmental Excellence Award. This is the retitling Beyond Earth Day Awards, and I believe Chairman Gill is planning on having a short discussion about that later today. So we want to let you know that process is in process now.
Thank you very much. Board members, any general questions for the director or staff? Mr. Director, I have a request that would like to have you start considering. Give you a little background, tell you where we think we are, and then see where we can go from there. A couple of years ago, we put together 7 pilot projects for long lateral horizontal wells. The first 3 companies that accepted that were NEWFIELD, who I believe is in the audience today, Crescent Point, and Whiting. Since then, it's expanded to Axia, EP, and Ultra. And we're 2 years down the road in these pilot projects. Some of them are, some of the orders are limiting in time to a certain period, and then they have to come back and report. We're wondering if it isn't worthwhile to pause at this moment and look at what we've learned up to this point, and if there are any matters that have ripened to the point that perhaps an action item or 2 or rule change or rule, really what we're looking at is voids in the rule or gaps in the rules that might be able to be filled and with the assistance of the industry. Always with the overall eye toward letting everyone know the rules of the game before they play. And we recognize also that the geology of the basin is so complex that one size does not fit all circumstances, and that is a challenge in any rulemaking where you have that kind of a circumstance. But we'd like to maybe just slow down a little bit and just say, okay, what have we learned? What lessons need to come back to the board that we can look at this, both positive and critical of the board decisions. You know, have we done everything we should have done? Were we as wise as we could have been? You know, what could we do better? What could we? You put yourself out on the line with your annual questionnaire about how you're doing. It's time for us to do the same, and so we'd like to have that. We'd invite you to reach out to the industry, to the companies that are involved in these long laterals. We invite you to reach out to the attorneys that come before us in those matters, with the idea that we can always looking to how we can do better. Even if we got it right, how could we have done better? And I think that's kind of where I'm hoping we can go. And so if we could maybe take a few months, we know you've got your water issues, and we know the legislature's in session. Your life, your liberty, your property is never safe when the legislature is in session. But we would like to have a hard look at that and then come back, lessons learned. Board members, anyone want to comment on that? And then, Director, if you'd comment back on that. And that applies both surface estate, you know, the issues with the surface, the royalty owners, how companies interact with each other. We've already had one Supreme Court case or dispute that went to the Supreme Court on how companies interact with each other. Anything else we can learn from that would be appreciated. Seeing nothing from the board, in terms of comments or questions on that, your response.
I fully support the concept, Mr. Chairman, and I know the division, the staff, our attorneys will do the job of reaching out and talking to others and trying to come up with a compendium of lessons learned from the process that's taken place over the last couple of years. I don't necessarily see it as hitting the pause button, because you're frankly going to have continuous matters that are going to come in front of you as we're conducting this review. But I am 100% in the boat of saying that we will try to do the best job we can to meet your concerns and to basically take a look at how we can do things better. So thank you.
Appreciate that. Anything else, Mr. Director?
I think that's it. I'll turn the time back to you, Mr. Chairman, and be ready to answer any other questions that come up.
Thank you very much. This is the time and place for any public comments. If anyone here would like to address the board on something within our jurisdiction, we'd invite you to come forward at this time. Seeing none, then we'll take a break and we'll be back here ready to start with our formal presentation and formal hearings at 9 a.m. Pardon me, 10 a.m. Question? For the record, thank you. We do have a working lunch that will be considered an open meeting under the Utah Open Meetings Act. It will be to discuss the criteria for the Environmental Excellence Awards, and then to talk about legislative updates and anything else that the board has to do interface with the legislature. We would invite the public, if you're interested, to join in that discussion. Thank you very much, Julie. Okay, we're taking a break.
Two down low.